I am behaving like Professor Jeffries these days. As you see, I have my books. 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 And a lot of notes. So you're going to have to sit down and listen to me. And I'm back in my jacket. That tells you what that means. My topic this evening is an extremely serious one. It is serious, made even more serious because it is not ventilated very often. And we in the United States of America are suffering from a lot of mendacity on this subject. Because there are those in this country who have been promulgating consistently in the last 40 years that all our salvation will come from embracing Islam. Our salvation will come from realizing that we are the Asiatic black man. Our salvation will come when we say that Muhammad is the prophet and everybody else is wrong. And that is our original religion. But none of this is true. None of this is true. Christianity is no more our religion than Islam is our religion, than that we are Hebrew Israelites or anything else. The African has always had his own religion, and there's enough scholarship that has been done to tell you some of the great religions that we have, starting in Egypt and Nubia and Kush. We have been the most religious people of the world. But unfortunately, each wave of conquerors that has come in has brought his religion. And this is to be expected, because religion is the opiate of the masses in fact and in truth. With religion, you can turn a religious people into believing that when you lash them, it is something good for them, and that you do it only because you're thinking of their interest. Strange enough, you will justify anything because your mind has been conditioned to believe that is the will of God and that you are submitting to God. My topic this evening is a double-edged topic. It's the Arab invasion of Africa and the Arab slave trade in Africa. But it's essentially about the relationships of Arabs and Africans in Africa. So I will have to start out by dealing first of all with the Africans, who we were and whence we came. Then I will talk about the Arabs, who they are and whence they came. Who are we? Asiatic black man? The work of Leakey, the Leakeys, 1959, in the Olduvai Gorge on the borders of Kenya and Tanzania, where they discovered remains of Homo sapiens. And we have to be careful to distinguish between Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens sapiens, as Brother Cheikh Anta Diop will tell us, because that is our stages in the evolution of man. But Homo sapien is the first day man that is erect and has the features of man in the nature of walk and gait. In 1959, research showed that male fossil remains dated from 1,700,000 BC were found in this area, unmistakably African. Further work showed female remains dating from 2 million BC, unmistakably African. These are the earliest remains of Homo sapiens anywhere in the world. You will see conflicting statements written by Europeans or Asiatics, Asians, whatever you want to call them, who will say otherwise. But careful research will show that this is all a lie, and that lies have been told about Africa for so many years, hundreds of years, because people wanted to make the African feel that he had never achieved anything in the history of the world. If you look on the map, it's very difficult to see it there, but remember where, if somebody who is near the map will point out roughly where the border of Kenya and Tanzania is. Then having pointed out where the border of Kenya and Tanzania is, there, then let us look down to Egypt and see where the Nile enters the Mediterranean through that little isthmus there, okay? Now, it is our thesis that civilization came from this area where man first started and came down the Nile. And that is the essence of modern scholarship. Now, when I make that term modern scholarship, I'm not saying that the people in the ancient world didn't believe this. The people in the ancient world knew this. They knew that civilization came down the Nile. They never had any doubt about it. But we had a piece of scholarship that started about 300 years ago when the Europeans enslaved us that changed all of this thinking. And then you had a whole set of scholars, first order liars, who distorted history and produced a scholarship that said civilization came up the Nile because the Egyptians were white people. Totally and absolutely untrue. So Africans emerged out of this Garden of Eden, if you want to call it that. And we came down the Nile, but we went in other directions too. We went in other directions too. So that it's not only Egyptian civilization, these other civilizations in Africa are very old. And the reason why we get so much about Egyptian civilization is because Egypt has been so near to Europe, so it has been so carefully examined. We have Zimbabwe in the other direction, and nobody knows how things happened there, because scholars have not really invested the time on researching that. We look also at the situation as we move down this Nile and realize that by about 10,000 BC, we were already beginning to lay the foundations of orderly agriculture in Africa, in what is called Kemet and Nubia. Okay? And at this time, everybody else in the world was in a state of primeval darkness. We have, in the concept of Africa, a cutoff along the northern part of Africa where the historians tell us that the people above this line are undeniably white people who belong to a white race. Then a little later now, when more facts have hit them, they start saying they are Euro-Asian people. Euro-Asian people who are light-skinned, white. You know, they can't exactly say white, but light-skinned people. They are, of course, not African. Well, there's a great man who came out of Africa. Perhaps the greatest intellectual of our time. And he wasn't born anywhere in the West. He was born in Senegal. This man was an anthropologist and a historian, a mathematician and a physicist. And I love this man because I'm like this man. See, you see me researching history, but my trade is mathematics, physics, and electronics. See, Cheikh Anta Diop, perhaps the greatest intellectual of our race in the 20th century. And he was able to disprove all these theories. And his great other book, as many of you do know, is Civilization and Barbarism. Now what Cheikh Anta Diop has told us, and if we think about it, it can't be too far wrong, is that these Mediterranean peoples called Berbers and Carthaginians, they were never anywhere in Africa before 1500 BC. But 1500 BC is late developmental chart of Africa. So Africans must have been in all of that Mediterranean, a solid mass of Africans. They're all going into Europe in the time around 2000 BC. As a matter of fact, we do know from history that the Phoenicians, the granddaddies of the Carthaginians, came over into North Africa in 800 BC. Now you wonder why I'm taking so much time about this, because it's a question of whose land? Whose land? Who is the righteous owner of the land? The brother from the PSC speaking about that. And that's why we in the UNINA said, by the way, I'm Marcus Garvey Jr., President General of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World. in the direct line of descent from Marcus Garvey, 7th President General, and I'm doing my father's work. And my father's work is a redemption of Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. And that cannot change. Now, I just heard a brother say why they recognize why they turned against Mandela. Why I turned against Mandela finally was when a friend in England sent me a copy of a piece of work by Mr. Mandela many years ago in which he said that he has turned his back upon the philosophies of Marcus Garvey. And I said if Nelson Mandela had turned his back upon the philosophies of Marcus Garvey, then I, Marcus Garvey Jr., is certainly going to turn my back upon the philosophies of Nelson Mandela. Now, let us have a look. These are the African people who spread out from that Garden of Eden all over Africa. And we can say that there was nobody there in Africa from 2000 BC backwards. They came after. Don't care what part of Africa you look at. Now let's look at the Arabs. The Arabs are the people of Arabia. And you look across the Red Sea, if somebody just point out the Red Sea there, and point out Arabia for me. There it is. There it is in the corner. In the northeast of Africa, to the northeast, there is Arabia. That's where the Arabs come from. Here you talk with Professor Clark, you're talking about a sand people, a nomadic people. A lot of nomadic people in those times. The Chinese were wandering across the Gobi Desert. Yes, sir. They hadn't built any civilization. When we had a civilization. Yes, third page on your map, on the handout. And remember the way to read it so that the legend comes in the left-hand corner. Okay? Now these Arabian people, and here's where a little investigation helps us. These Arabian people, look across again, next door, across the Red Sea. What do you see? Now, somewhere down there, I don't have it on the map, but on all the maps of the ancient world, you would see near the bottom of the Red Sea, you would see the names Meroe and Aksum. And some of you who have listened to lectures by Professor Clark and Dr. Penn will have heard these words about Meroe and Aksum. It's not on that map because it would be on the ancient maps, but it would be in the Sudan.
In between the Akbar River and the Blue Nile.
See if you can track it out. Go up a little more and a little to the right, and there you'll see Meroe and a little lower down Aksum. Those were great nations that existed in those days. Now, those areas were called loosely Ethiopia. And the Ethiopians were made excursions into Arabia from early areas, and Arabs came across the Red Sea were brought back across the Red Sea by Africans. I'm going to make statements about the introduction of Arabs into Africa, but the statements I make do not take into account what was happening there. I want to read from the African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality this statement. But you have to understand that there was activity across there, battles between Arabs and other Semitic people who were in that Arabian Peninsula, and our people in Meroe, Aksum, in the Ethiopian heartland there. And this was happening a couple hundred years before the main Arab body moved out, because they couldn't move in force across the Red Sea in those days. Moved higher up, and that's the invasion I'll be talking about later on. That's really when the weight of the Arabs came over. But they came, and after that, they kept coming across the Red Sea as they developed their skills. But let me point out something to you which is not pointed out. Page 151 of the African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, Cheikh Anta Diop. And I'll go to the previous paragraph. Reisner, which is one of these fake European, and George Andrew Reisner, fake great Egyptologists, Diop says he could not have failed to know that Nubian civilization dates back to 1500 BC. That is to say, prior to the appearance of the white Japhetic Libyan in Africa. Consequently, the problem is not to seek Libyans in recent Nubian history, but to find some at the start of that civilization about 5000 BC. This task Reisner was careful not to attempt. Then he says, when Muhammad was born, Arabia was a Negro colony with Mecca as its capital. The Quran refers to the army of 40,000 men sent by the king of Ethiopia to crush the Arab revolt. One corps of that army consisted of warriors mounted on elephants. Heard that before? The Romans know that, don't they? What was his name? Hannibal. De la Fosse himself is obliged to record that suzerainty of Ethiopia over Arabia. You can research this yourself. Has Minister Farrakhan or any of the great proponents of Islam in this country told us that in the time of the Muhammad, the Prophet, there was an army of 40,000 Africans in Arabia? Have you heard this? I beg you, my children, have you heard it? Of course you won't hear it. Of course you won't hear it. You will hear that you are the Asiatic black man. Asiatic black man. The only way a black man gets into Asia is because he left Africa and went there. Now, 622 AD, 4 men travel by camel from Mecca to Medina. Mecca to Medina. And that is the beginning of things. The beginning of things. This is where the Arabs start to get moving with their philosophy of Islam, their religion. What is this great single statement? There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God. Now this is the message that is taken throughout Arabia and unites these sand people, these desert people, into a warlike band to spread their religion of Islam. Muhammad dies in 632 AD. And immediately, the followers of Muhammad, the caliphs, go on the warpath. And the first place that they overrun is Syria from 634 to 636 AD. On your map, that's a little to the right up there. There is a kind of orange spot, Syria. Someone can point it out for us. Syria. Damascus.
It's on the third page up in the right-hand corner a little bit.
Oh, check your map. I forgot you have it with you. Check your third sheet. All right? 634 to 636. Find conquest in Syria, and they move further out in that direction. Now, they look the other direction and say, let's go the other way. And what's in the other way? Egypt. Kemet. And they enter Egypt in 639 AD. Brothers and sisters, before these Arabs came to Egypt in 639 AD, there was no significant presence of Arabs in Africa. They are not native to Africa. They were native to the Arabian Peninsula. They were a wild nomadic people with no civilization to speak of. No civilization to speak of. At that time, our civilization was, to put it very mildly, certainly over 6,000 years old. It could have been as much as 10,500 years old. Because if you talk about civilization, you talk about a settled agriculture, established towns. Remember, these are Bedouin horsemen. They're roaming all over the place, just moving their tents. That is not civilization. That is nothing. They don't grow their own food. They chop off people and head and capture food. That is what they were. So how could they be the light of the world? Now, let us go to the very words of Chancellor Williams. For this is an epic time, this entry into, I want to get things right here. Yes. I'm going to use Chancellor Williams' versions. There is information in this book, which is a very good book, Oliver and Fage on A Short History of Africa. There is some information in here, I read from Davidson, but Davidson has to be treated with a reservation, supposed to be the doyen of historians, but he's a white man speaking with white reservations. He can only see history in the paternalistic sense of the white man being the great father of civilization, and he builds his stories to accept that. And if he can't get a white man, then he gets a proto-white man to be in the civilization. Okay? Now, they conquered Egypt, and that's the northern part above the first cataract. Yes, really there where we see, roughly where you see Egypt today. Very quickly. By 643, they had essentially taken over the whole of Egypt in 4 years. And they had done this with an army of 4,000 men. And we have to remember, perhaps I should make a diversion before I do this for us to understand why it was so easy to take Egypt. Egypt, as it then was, had only a minority of Africans in Egypt. It was the Europeanized and the mulatto and offspring of mixtures of black and white who were in power in Egypt. It was not the Africans themselves. They were now below the first cataract. They were in Nubia proper. And we can just go through the series of invasions which weakened Upper Egypt. As a matter of fact, I will start at 663 BC, but there were other invasions before that, notably the Hyksos and other Semitic peoples. But at 663 BC, this was one of the great onslaughts that really moved us back. The Assyrians sacked Thebes, 663 BC. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of his spears were like stars on the sea when the blue wave rolls nightly on deep Galilee. You see, why do I stress the Assyrian invasion? Because that was when we had what is called a technological gap. The African, who had smelted iron so many years before, used iron in domestic purposes, whereas the Assyrian used iron for warfare. We were still using bronze for warfare, bronze weapons. And the steel, of course, is a much more deadly weapon than a bronze sword or spear. Technological gap. And there was no reason why it should have existed, because we had the knowledge, but we did not apply that knowledge. See, that was one of the things. You see, the second great invasion was that of the Persians in 525 BC. Now, in between 525 BC, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. I would go before that and the great work of Pianki, but we don't need to deal with that before because 63 BC was a time when, after that time, we were never really a force in Egypt again. You see? So, but there was another Persian invasion in 525 BC. Again, these are softening up Egypt. Then came the Greeks under Alexander, 332 BC. Again, softening up, softening up. But notice that all of these people, one thing about them, they weren't going below the first cataract to meet the mass power of the Africans. 31 BC, the Romans, perhaps the greatest of all the conquerors in the time. And they stayed there for a long time. Then came the Arabs. So we know that by now, Egypt was easy to knock off. Then, 643 AD, and Abdullah, the Arab governor, a viceroy of Egypt. You see, everywhere that the Arabs went, they set up their viceroys, because they are now being ruled from Damascus and Baghdad. He decided that he was going to go south. He was going to go where nobody else had gone before. Everybody stopped. We wanted to go into the land of the blacks. That's Sudan. Yes. And he had a much bigger army now. And he advanced below the first cataract. And what happened was something that has happened so again and again in Africa. We moved back and they came in. Moved back and they came in. We didn't engage them frontally. And they said, oh man, these Africans are not as tough as they thought we were. They're running. Well, they were caught into the heartland of Nubia and they were put to the sword. And the agent of destruction was the great phalanxes of African bowmen who shot with deadly accuracy and cut down the Arabs. That was the first defeat of the Arabs after they burst out of their lair in Arabia to terrorize the world. First formal defeat. Now, in reading some books, there was one book which I didn't even bother to bring, because the brother writing about this, I should never have used that word, the Aryan writing about this time said that he feels that it must have been something about the African armies and their bowmen that caused the Arabs to return or retreat. He couldn't bear to make the word that black men had defeated Arabs who were white people in warfare. It's terrible to read books like that. This battle is not given in battles in the history of the world. It is not given. If you read the history of the world about the great battles of the world, it's not given. Now, there were over 100,000 Africans fighting on one side, and there were at least that amount, if not more, of Arabs on the other side. But I pause here to remind you of another battle, which was not reported in history. And this is the great battle under Emperor Menelik at Adawa in 1896, when the great Italian army marched into Ethiopia, as it was then called Abyssinia, in the same way. They were drawn into the interior. But now this battle was not fought at bowmen, for the Emperor Menelik had purchased heavy artillery and machine guns from the Prussians and the Swedes, and had been trained proficiently in their use for many years, you see. Because he knew what was coming, because the Italians had been given a protectorate by the Congress of Berlin, that infamous European party where they sliced up Africa and painted the colors of each European nation on it. But to put it short, at Adawa, when they came in between the two mountain ranges, Menelik had them. And the bombardment that ensued with those heavy artillery on the higher mountain ranges, on the machine gun posts at the lower, right into the Italians, over 40,000 were dead. at Adawa. That battle is not recorded in history either. I'll give you a third feat recorded in history, but which has been recovered from the annals of the British War Office and the French. Napoleon was defeated by the giants of Haiti with the loss of 100,000 men, the French. And his armies were led by his brother-in-law, Leclerc. This is not documented in history, but has been hidden in the records of the French War Office. The British, the cocky British followed, said they will conquer Haiti and those arrogant Africans. They suffered the worst defeat the British army had suffered for some 200 years. 100,000 British dead in Haiti. So we must all lift our hats to the great men of Haiti. And remember, history does not record that either. So when we win, history does not talk about it. When we lose, good. Now, after this repulse in 643 AD, the Arabs, like all white people, licked their wounds for a while, but they are coming back at you. And they came back in 1651 in tremendous numbers. See? In tremendous numbers. And the Africans now had to retreat. And their capital city was attacked and eventually taken. But they did not give up the fight. They came back in more numbers and numbers. And they fought the Arabs to a standstill. And when the Arabs decided they had to retreat, they sued for a peace. And unfortunately, brothers and sisters, we let them have a peace and an arrangement. Now, one of the things of this peace was, it was called Bact, or annual tribute to be paid to the Arabs. And it's been emphasized that this is terminology, because the Arabs had to pay payments to the Africans. But the unfortunate payment that we elected, our ancestors elected to make, was to deliver 360 slaves near the frontier each year, plus 40 extra slaves as a gift to the Egyptian viceroy. In exchange for this, we got wheat, barley, and wine, far in excess of the value of the slave. But the damage was done. For now, we had legalized the taking of slaves of our people over to Arabia. So the invasion of Africa continued. If you look on your map, you will see a place called Kairouan that the Arabs reached in 670 AD. This was in southern Tunisia. The Arabs were also moving in the opposite direction, as I told you. But let us concentrate on them sweeping across Africa, the north of Africa. They reached Carthage in 695 AD. And soon after, I think by about 705, they were looking right on the Atlantic. And this was an achievement for these desert rats who had come out of their sand holes only a few years before, but now they were conquering. And they didn't stop in Africa. For they entered Spain in 711 AD. And when you talk about Africa, Arabs conquering us in North Africa, they were conquering a lot of other people too. And I want this fact to be emphasized. We made our mistakes, but we beat them, we fought them to a standstill in our land, there in the Sudan, in Nubia. They entered Spain in 711, and they were in Portugal in 713. And they were in France in 714 AD. How many of you knew that the Arabs were in France? Yes, they were. And they were prowling around in France And they weren't only looking at the scenery or drinking the wine, and they were there in Europe until Charles Martel the Hammer defeated them at Poitiers in 732 AD and pushed them back across the Pyrenees into Spain. And you know how long they stayed in Spain. Now, at this time now, the Arabs did control the whole of that pinch up on the north there. You could see the track across that last sheet. The Arabs now control the whole of that area. But there were Arabs now who were probing across the Red Sea, moving across the Red Sea also. And these invasions became more important subsequently. Now, what happened during this, after this invasion, was that the pressure of the Arabs continued. And in this process, they were spreading their religion of Islam. And this religion of Islam was now coming across the Sahara, for they're moving across the Sahara, although we still had firm in Nubia. And the two kingdoms that we had in Nubia were Makuria and Alwa. And after what we have to realize is that although they were coming across the Sudan, they were held over there, the Sahara. Remember the Sahara, just point out the stretch of the Sahara all the way across, right across out to the Atlantic Ocean, see? Right across there. So all that stretch they were coming across. Now, in coming across, they were meeting other African nations there. And those nations were becoming Islamized. See? So there was invasion coming across the Sahara. Now, they looked at the Sudan, and for over 500 years, they could not penetrate there. The penetration happened in the 13th century. And here we have the dynastic problems that we have had in Africa. As a matter of fact, this is one of the first examples in the more modern history where a nephew of the king went to the Sultan in Cairo. If you notice, you'll see Fostat. That was the old Arab name. Fostat became Cairo. And that's why Fostat is on that old map. And he intervened. So this nephew of the king wanted the throne for himself. He can't wait to be a king. So he goes to the Isham and says, "Crown me king and I will rule for you." Well, eventually he did. Because of this, there's a division in the land among those who follow him and not. Well, when he became king and the other king was overthrown, what do you think the Arabs? Now the Arabs put their demands to him. And he was not strong enough to resist them, and they wiped him out. But there was still Alwa. Still Alwa. And that nation down in the Sudan remained until the 16th century, when the mass forces of the Arabs striking from different directions overran them. So from the time that the Arabs came into Africa in 639, they did not secure the whole of the Sudan until 900 years later. And it shows that our ancestors were incredible warriors to hold out against the whole pressure of the Muslim, because remember that these people overran all the way into Turkey. They went up into Turkey. Show them up in the Caucasus, they were up there. Look on that map and show the directions that those Arabs were taking their march. We just have recently looking at Yugoslavia. Oh, look at those white Muslims there. because the Arabs came there and that made them Muslims. So we are looking at recent history. We see the effect of that drive of the Arabs. So the Arabs are an invading, thieving people, and an Arab, an Englishman, a white American, a Frenchman, a German, they're all the same breed.
Right.
Yeah. Thieving, slave trading people. If any of you have Arab names, you can change them and get yourself some real African names. I mean, and don't say, wow, Marcus, why do you keep this Irish name of Garvey? It's because my father distinguished it so much, I can't change it. Now, brothers and sisters, those are the classical invasion routes, and you see them coming, you know, like termites across the Red Sea, year after year, year after year. They're not all the time they come in swords and shields, you know. They come in to trade and probe. I mean, they were spying. They're checking out the land, infiltrating. And that's the whole story. You sit down in South Africa and you let this cracker stay there. He's in Namibia. He's in Zimbabwe.
Tell them.
And there are going to be more and more of them coming. I mean, you hear that some are leaving. For every one that leaves, there's going to be 3 that come in. Remember where we are. Where are we? 400 years ago, who was here making a powwow right here in Newark?
We quick. We quick. Passig.
Yes. Yes, the red man. The American. The American. You go on the reservation and tell him that you're the American. He'll tell you something. He's still here, but he's on a reservation. Do we want to be on the reservations in Africa? Do we want to be on the reservations in the Caribbean? I mean, already now they're taking up all that lovely sea, land by the sea, buying it up. Americans, Canadians, Germans, British, French. They don't mind having villas beside each other. They just speak a little different language, but they're all buddy boys. That's something we have to learn. White people may have a quarrel among themselves, but when they see you in the distance, they come together like this. Woo. Yeah, boy. That's why a Russian can come all the way from Russia here, and an apartment is found for him in Brooklyn. Yes, sir, an assistance is found for him in Brooklyn. He's a ready-made refugee. But if you're a black man from the Caribbean or West Africa or Southern Africa, and you have spent 3 years to get a visa to come to the United States, you're not an idiot, because if you're an idiot, you cannot come into the United States. You try to get anything like what that Russian is going to get. They only tell you to go and look for some work, and you ain't never going to get work like the skills that you had when you come in here. You're going to have to stay here and fight for 5 years before you can even get a decent job. But an Englishman, a New Zealander, an Australian, they come in here, boy, and they're all set 2 weeks after they come. They know everything. They know where to get everything and every kind of assistance. They are well taken care of. You think about that. Brothers and sisters, we want to look now at slavery and the slave trade. I want to talk, and I'm going to have to be jumping around again from book to book. We said before that official slavery in Africa, and I need to emphasize this, official Arab slavery in Africa really started from 652 AD. And it grew and grew and grew. And I want to make this statement so for your own records. It should be noted that slaves had been sent to Arabia from Kush, Meroe, and Aksum, modern Ethiopia and Somalia, across the Red Sea intermittently and sporadically for some 250 years before 652 AD. However, the formal institutionalized regular trading in Africa and humanity conducted by the Arabs of North Africa and the Middle East began at this time. Okay? Now let's look at the Eastern trading patterns. The slave trade had three routes. First, across the Sahara to North Africa. And North African countries of Morocco, Algeria, Libya is the big one, and Egypt. So if you look at the top part, you're going right across there. They crossed the Sahara. And immediately I want to tell you that crossing the Sahara in those days was no mean feat. You're looking from the takeoff point where the slaves were captured, and you're looking at the top of Nigeria, go down now, yes, the coast, the back coast there, further up the coast, more inland, right, across there. You see, you look across that pull across there, you're looking at 600, 700 miles in those caravans, across that sand. Shackled. I know you see the dense pack for the Middle Passage, but the conditions in those Arab caravans, they were no fun. And to move across that desert of 600 miles, you're looking at a journey of 1.5 months. Yes, sir, 45 days in that heat. And all you have to have is a miscalculation in your water supply and you die of thirst. Now, in this book, one of these books here, I was making a study, and there was a caravan. And this was not in the early days of slavery. This was something in the 17th century, where a caravan arrived in the north, and 1,000 African slaves had perished from thirst in crossing over the Sahara. Yes, my brothers and sisters, as much as you hear about the Middle Passage, going across the Sahara was a terrible thing. Bound with the little children crying by their mothers. The neck collar, the leg brace, across that sand, that burning heat. The trading process consisted of the capture by force of the Africans in the interior. We want to emphasize that the overwhelming majority of slaves were obtained by warfare or kidnapping. Now, there were African tribes who were selling Africans, but the only way they got Africans were to attack and seize them. Ain't nobody walking into slavery of his own free will, man, woman, or child. So it's warfare and kidnapping. Don't tell anybody tell you that getting slaves was a benign adventure and that people were better off in slavery than they were otherwise. I mean, I think you all have read these little fairy stories in the white man's books. Now, the march of the captives to the coast or Saharan border town. And some of these border towns are famous to this day. Walata, the Jen, and I think you may not be able to catch it on that map, Timbuktu and Kano in northern Nigeria. These were the great slave towns where the huge pens of slaves were kept. You see, a caravan didn't cross the Sahara every day. If you're looking at the Atlantic now, a ship didn't take off from Goree Island every day. So you're penned there in these forts or stockades in these great towns across the Sahara in the case of the Arab slave trade. And what do you think of the conditions there? Nice? You keep them in the slave pens until the caravans arrive. Then they travel across the Sahara or across the Red Sea, and the other pathway was the Indian Ocean. You see, because those were the three pathways. The Red Sea into Arabia, and across the Indian Ocean to India. Now there's another takeoff point from India, where our slave ancestors were taken by the Portuguese and carried around India and into China and even into Japan. And this is one of the things that surprised me when I heard from people who had been there and who had studied this, that they are Africans in China to this day who are the descendants of African slaves. So we are truly a universal people. Now Marcus Garvey knew this, that's why he had created the Universal Negro Improvement Association. You see, we got all the way down into Australia. In the New Guinea, you see our people down there. We are very traveled people. So we didn't only travel as slaves, but we traveled as freedmen up and all over the place going on down. We have spread our race. Why? Because we were the first people on earth, period. Second, we were the first civilized people on earth. And that's two great firsts. Now, the Arab slave trader brought his African merchandise to a broker in a large town who put them up for sale in the slave market. Now, among the many brokers that were there in the Arab world, there were some brokers who don't like to be remembered now in the United States of America. These were the Jewish brokers who were in all the great towns such as Damascus and Baghdad. Yes. Yes, sir. What a lot of trouble Professor Jeffries got into. And all he talked about was the old Jew over there in Newport, Rhode Island. But what about the Jews of Amsterdam? The Jews of Lisbon? The Jews of Cadiz? The Jews of Toulouse and Marseille? The Jews of Bristol, the great slave port of England, Bristol. Because that's where the great voyages were planned. Who had the money to put those ships on the sea to send them out for 3 months and to take that route over to Africa and back again? Who had the money to finance these huge caravans to go and fetch slaves across? Who were the great merchants of the Middle East? Who were the great merchants of Europe? Answer me, brothers and sisters, who were they? Jews! So how the hell they weren't in the slave trade? They never cared about how they turned an honest dollar. And we have... Well, from their point of view, it's an honest dollar, although they are lamenting the fact now and denying it. Now, slaves, after you bought their slaves from the broker, they were used in domestic service as servants. And here's what the Arabs did that not even the deadly Europeans did to us, except when they were real mad. They made us eunuchs. Eunuchs. I heard somebody say what? A eunuch means that they castrated the African black man. And these were there to guard the harems of the wealthy and the powerful. And we were also used as soldiers to fight for the Arabs. Don't look so strange. You were used as soldiers right here in the United States of America by a man called Honest Abe Lincoln. And he used you when he needed you. Fight. But we have always fought for other people. Fought to build other empires. Now, more limited use was made of African slaves in agriculture, mining, and industry than was used in the Western slave trade. And this is how the Eastern slave trade differed. The principal areas that supplied slaves for the Eastern trade, and these varied in importance over the approximately 1,250 years of the trade. Because I am saying here 1,250 years, and I want you to understand that effectively from about 1900, the African trade, the Arab slave trade went down, would decline because of the anti-slave conventions of the time. But Arabs never stopped trading in African slaves. As a matter of fact, the last legalized legalized abolition of slavery, and I remember I'm saying legalized because I'm using the word advisedly, was in Mauritania, and this was in 1980, as late as 1980. So up to 1980, it was legal by the laws of Mauritania for Arabs to have Africans as slaves. Now, I am credibly informed, and my visit to Africa, as there last year in Egypt, that slavery is still being carried on, where young blacks who go on the Hajj never return from the Hajj. They are enslaved in Saudi Arabia and transported to other parts of the Arab world still as slaves. So the Arab will not give up his fiendish ways, his love of Africans' flesh for his own purposes. Now, the regions from where the slaves came from were the coastlands of, remember now I'm talking about the Arab slave trade, were the coastlands of Kenya and Tanzania. Kenya and Tanzania, look where they were there. The coast of Somalia, higher up, yes, where the US forces are now. Abyssinia, which is modern Ethiopia. Nubia, and the area between the Niger and the Atlantic coast. That's over on the other side. You see, the area between the Niger and the Atlantic coast, and a wide, huge area around Lake Chad, which is a little higher up to the right. Lake Chad, yes. And of course there you have the movement straight across the Sahara into Morocco and Tunisia and Algeria. Some people will say that Arab slavery was kinder than European slavery. That's a joke. No slave master, you have to understand something. I don't care who you are not naturally a slave. You have to be made to be a slave. When somebody catches a free man or a free woman or a free child, they don't consent to be slaves. You have to do. The thing that they all use was a thing called seasoning. That means when they get the slave first, they have to train him to be a slave. And what was the tool of training? Whip. And everybody used the whip on the African, whether every kind of European, German, Frenchman, Italian, Spaniard, every Portuguese, everybody used the whip. And believe me, the Arabs used the whip too. Now, the cruelty of the Arabs is very well known. You see, they used to castrate you. Well, you know. No, they castrate you just without you doing anything. Now, imagine when you did something to really make them mad. See? The thing about slavery in the Arab world is that the proportion of domestic slaves, house slaves, was much greater. So in a sense, because a plantation slave was okay, all right, good. I'd have to use these up. Domestic slavery, you don't have to use, once a slave has been broken, you don't have to use the whip, like in plantation slavery. You see, in plantation slavery, you're trying to make a man and a woman work 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 and perhaps 7 days a week. Now, you need special stimuli to make people work like that. It ain't normal. It ain't normal. See? And that's why plantation slavery was more brutal. And there was a reason why there were more domestic slaves in the Arab world. They were not used after thing. And one of the great reasons is what happened in the century. I want to get the century right here. Okay. It's the 9th century. That means a century that has the 800s in it. And it was the revolt of the Zanj. And these were East African slaves from areas that are now part of Kenya and Tanzania. And these Zanj were used by the Arabs in the 9th century to drain the salt marshes at the mouth of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Now, you may not, I don't think you're going to be able to see it on that map, but the Tigris and the Euphrates are up there going through Iraq and Syria there, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Yes, up there. Now the salt marsh is there. That's a tremendous job. And around Basra, if you remember the last little rumble that they had over there in Iraq, that they were fighting around Basra, and I said, that's where our people stood up against the Arabs 1,000 years before. We didn't know. You had black Americans over there, African Americans in Basra, and they didn't know that it was a land of glory for our race. You see, and these slaves were being used for the preparation of land for sugar cultivation. In 868, tens of thousands of African slaves of Zanj, and most of them were a fairly recent importation. And I want to stop here. Remember Haiti? What was the thing about the Haitian Revolution in the 1790s? Recent importation of slaves from Africa. So they still had freedom, smelling freedom strong in their noses. See what I mean? Hey, when you get the Africans telling freedom strong in their nose, boy, you better watch out. And these Zanj rebelled against the conditions of their enslavement. And the rebellion was very successful initially. Now, remember what I said, they were using us as soldiers. African troops of the Caliph's Guard sent to fight them, defected, and joined forces with their African brothers. And the Zanj extended the area and scope of their operations, building a capital city at Al-Muqtara and another fortified town at Al-Mania. And the classical book for this is Hunwick, and he has written, none of these books have this stuff, on black Africans in the Islamic world. Now by 1870 they had captured the flourishing seaport of Ubula, and in 1871 they sacked Basra, this enormous slaughter of the Arabs. Now Basra is on the border of Iraq, pretty close to Kuwait. By 1878, the major city of Wazit had been captured, and the Zanj forces were raiding within 17 miles of Baghdad, the heart of the great Arab empire. They had defeated a succession of Arab armies sent against them. So the Arabs now had to come back from all their possessions all over the Arab empire to defend Baghdad. And it was the entire Arab armies plus treachery, there's always treachery, who defeated the Zanj in 1880. They attacked the Zanj in 1880 and it took 3 years to defeat them. After those tremendous battles, which almost caused the overthrow of the whole Arab empire, the Arabs never used Africans in plantation slavery again. And they learned a lesson which was passed on to the wicked white man of the West, never to put Africans of the same nation or from the same area together on your plantations, for you are certain that they are going to revolt. And that is what happened to us, and why we had such difficulty in the United States and also in the Caribbean and South America, because they divided us up. In fact, the Portuguese made this mistake most of all, and that's why there were so many very powerful slave revolts in Brazil until they studied their history and corrected it. Now, I want to talk about how many. And it takes, you see, we're talking about slavery and the slave trade. And we're talking about people being slaughtered here, people being whipped to death, all that. But how many died in the slave trade? And I'm only going to confine myself naturally today Eastern slave trade, the Arab slave trade. Now, when you are looking at records to try to come to a conclusion as to how many Africans died in the Eastern slave trade, the first problem you come about is the number of areas of loss where there are no statistics available. Where would you find the documents that details the caravans that crossed the Sahara? Now, that is not, fictitious, because those documents are somewhere, but those documents are in the hands of Arabs, or they may have been destroyed. So an African historian can't get his hands on them. Now, the European is different in that you can go to the British Marine Department or whatever it is, or the French Marine, and if you were, you can actually look up those documents. The Europeans like to keep documents. But the Arabs are very cunning, and they don't keep documents. They ain't going, and if they keep them, they're not going to let you get them. Think about Arab, dangerous for them. No, even if you could get the documents, the records are never complete. Because their documents will only show legal transactions. Now let us look back across the Atlantic here. Now, you know slaves were coming in all along the time. You believe that every slave ship that came in legally and stopped in the port and went to the harbor master and he signed up and they checked the amount of slaves in there? Oh, no. A lot of those slave ships dumped their cargoes along the coast. Just like you have all that good old coke coming in here now. How does it get in? Right? Prohibition. How did all the liquor, where did all the liquor come from? You're trying to stop it, but it was coming in. So there were always large number of slaves ventures that were not legal. They were off the record. Because think of it, if you're going to go to a broker in Damascus, you have to come in legally. What about the little, if you have a set of slaves that you keep outside of Damascus and you come inside and say, I got some slaves. You know? Because whenever you come into the town, you go to the broker, he has to pay a tax. Because he's in the central market. Every market that you are in is taxed. Now you want to obviate the tax on slaves, you know how to do it. Now another thing is that the historians who present the tactics have been usually white, Europeans or Arabs, and have a vested interest in minimizing the Holocaust of African people. The data is contained in records of many different Arab countries, written in a variety of languages and entered over long periods of time. Even the Arab languages change over those long periods of time. You're talking about 1,300 years. How are you going to get at those records? Well, what we do know is that African lives were lost in the following ways. Forcible capture in the home, the village or town. Men, women, and children were seized. Look at the picture, the first picture on your map. Men, women, and children. And when a mother got killed, those slave traders weren't going to take those little babies that were left and carry them across the Sahara. They just left them to die. In the process of captures, mothers and fathers were separated from their children, the children perished. Slaves, as we said, were taken because of, as a result of wars. The march across to the Saharan border town. If you're captured in Africa, remember you have to go to this Saharan border town, somewhere across that Sahara, where you're put in those slave pens, and that's the first distance you have to travel. And that distance could be easily 100 miles, or 150 miles, through bush, dense vegetation. Now, in the slave pens, there you were waiting for the caravan. And the conditions were generally not very good. If you're penning cattle, and slaves, although slaves were very important, but you don't take care of them like you take care of your family. Then there was a journey across the Sahara, the Red Sea, or the Indian Ocean. And all of these, now here are people who have never been on a ship, if the case they're going across the Red Sea. It could be, you say, well, it's a short trip. If you're going across the Indian Ocean, it's a long trip. See, but you're going across the Sahara, that's another long trip. So you lose a lot of lives. Slaves were literally worked and beaten to death on the plantations. Well, we have to admit that there was not a large amount of plantation slavery in the Arab slave trade, and we have given the reasons why. They changed their tune after the 9th century. But before that, they were using Africans very liberally. In order to calculate the number of African lives that were lost in the Holocaust, in the Arab Holocaust, we have to work from the number of slaves that were transported across the Sahara, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. And the figure that I worked from was given by the Nigerian historian Inikori in the journal Tariq, which is the journal of the Nigerian Historical Society. And he came up with a figure of 10 million slaves exported from Africa during the 1250 years of the Eastern slave trade. Well, if you divide the numbers out, that figure comes out rather low. And after revision, I think that, you see, the average figure is 8,000 slaves per year. But there were periods in the Arab slave trade where the figures were way, way, way over that. You see? And if you, 8,000 was nothing. You see, so we have to believe that this figure is a little low. And it's much more difficult to get accurate figures on the Arab slave trade as compared to transatlantic slave trade. Not to say that any of these figures are very accurate. So I use a figure of 15 million as my base figure. Now, what we can assume with great force is that for every slave, and this is, I think, is a very conservative estimate, for every slave that you land in Damascus or Baghdad or in Goa in India, you see, or in Cairo or in Tripoli, all of those border towns across the Mediterranean, remember they had to cross that Sahara. For every slave successfully landed there, which is what the figure talks about. They only talk about the slaves that come over. 2 slaves were lost for every one that was landed. And anybody will tell you that that is a very conservative estimate. Right. So right away, you're looking at 30 million. See? Now, if you look for that 1,250 years, and you think of the number of generations that you had, and how many slaves died in captivity, because slaves died in captivity by suicide, because they were simply beaten to death. The kind of work that they did was hazardous, because slaves were used in mining in the Arab world. Although they took them off the plantations, they used them in mining because they had better physical control over them in the mines. That was hazardous work. See? So you got to look at the numbers during captivity. Now, how I did it was to look at the European figures for America and South America. And what you find is that if you take the number of people coming over, you see, that were brought over in slavery, you had well over 20 million that were landed in the West. Well over 20 million. Yet at the end of slavery, if you added up all of the Africans in the Western Hemisphere, you didn't get 20 million. And I can tell you that the most slaves were in the United States of America and, of course, in Brazil. Brazil had 6 million, America had 4 million. And if you add up all the rest of the other people, see, all right, they did not come to 10 million. So how is it that you brought over 20 million and all of that time, and these people were breeding? Because remember, these people were breeding slaves. Breeding slaves was big business. The answer is that you were beating them, working them to death. Then you get the statistic that the average life of a young African stud slave on the plantations was 8 years. So, we say that if you take that total that we had, then at least that amount of people must have died over that 12,050 years. So if we're looking at 15 million, right? We're saying that another 15 million died because you harassed them, beat them to death over all the generations that you had for 1,250 years. So now you're going to 45 million. Now what is the percentage that died crossing the Sahara or the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean? Remember I told you about the case where a caravan came and 1,500 died from thirst. Well, I was nice and kind and I said, if we're looking at 15 million, right? I'm saying that 20% mortality rate on the caravans. This is a better rate than was on the ships, because you know that on the ships coming across where the conditions were more hazardous, we will admit, it was as high as 25 and 30% mortality rate on those slave ships. Even crew had a mortality rate of around 18-20%. The crew and their conditions were superior to the dense packed Africans on board those slave ships. So that's another 3 million. So we're looking at a grand total for the Eastern slave trade of about 48 million. 48 million in the Arab slave trade. And this is the minimum. It could be very much higher than that. But for 1,250, and we can't stop at the 1,250 here because they're still enslaving us. Still enslaving us. And as far as I know, they could be still castrating us too. Well, the slave trade has ended, quote unquote. And we have to ask the answer, why? I want you to ask the answer, I want to ask the answer myself, why? I said, why did we Africans allow ourselves to be enslaved by the Arabs and the wicked white men of the West, the Aryans, and decimate us for such long periods of time without a unified and concerted response? Damn it. Don't you realize at some time that African life is being destroyed? I don't care what tribe you belong to. Hell. Now, I mean, you're going to say that we live in a time of enlightenment. So here am I, I'm an African Caribbean man, and if I hear that they kill my African American brother or African South American brother somewhere, I get mad. Well, you're going to say, well, we know now that if they kill him, they would kill me. But damn it, 500 years ago, we should have realized the same thing, or 1,000 years ago. There was no distinction in who they were snatching. There was no distinction. Now, I don't know why. I tried to look at the thing, and this is, if all my analysis, this is the one I have the most, try and see if you can help me on this. I came up with 5 points that may have accounted for why we behaved the way we did. The first one was slavery was acceptable among the nations. And it's a fact that during the major portions of the periods over which our Holocaust occurred, slavery was an acceptable practice of the law of nations. But the brutality of the slave trade, again, this is not sufficient to explain. Racial awareness. Africans lacked racial awareness. Now, this is a big one. I think there's some truth in this. Now, we are not as racially aware as other people. And I speak from my experience in the Caribbean, which is a good experience because we have the white, yellow, and brown, and the black. The only thing we don't have down there is a red man because they wiped him out a long time ago. But when you live among these different people, you're very much aware of racial differences. Because although you pretend and say that there's no color prejudice down in the Caribbean, you do know that a Chinaman is a Chinaman. And he don't want to mix with you. And he's very racially aware as far as you're concerned. You know, when he has his association, you dare don't put your black, you know what, in there. He's in there organizing. The Arabs have their organization and they're organizing. The East Indians, a cocky set of brown fellas over in Asia, they have their organization. You don't dare come near there. So we know that. You see, people are racially aware. And as for the white man, we know how racially aware he is. But all these fellas are racially aware. White, yellow, brown, or red. And by the way, a lot of people don't know that the Red Indians had slaves here in the United States of America too. Yes, sir, the Cherokee Nation had a whole lot of slaves. Yes, sir. Yes, madam, they did. Everybody had Africans as slaves. Before we form alliances with people, we better find out the truth about them. Yes, sir. Yeah, you can go in the library, go down in the Newark Library, you'll see what they call it, red over black. That's another famous book on the whole Red Indian slavery. And they had us as slaves. It was trading with us with the white man. Yes, sir. Technology gap. During long periods of our Holocaust, the invading predators, Arab and Aryan, had a decisive advantage in weaponry over our African ancestors and kinsmen. This is another good point. Religion. Africans are and have always been deeply religious people. Both in slavery were quick to hand over their religions to Africans. You see that religion thing? You know what King George did with that Bible, did you? He put in there for those phrases about he who was of wood and who draws of water, be pleased to remain in the estate which the Lord hath placed thee. That wasn't in no Bible before. There ain't no word of God that said that. Well, he put it in for you. And we used to sing it and slop it up and, yeah. See what I mean, brothers and sisters? Even the very book that comes to you, you got to check it out. Whether it's called a Bible or a Quran, be sure it's the authentic thing. And if it's to submit to somebody and be their slave, you got to ask questions about that. Now the final one, as I said, and I think there's a lot of truth in it, is tribalism. In much of Africa, economic, social, and political organization is based on a tribal unit. Now there is an explanation. Chancellor Williams talks about this tribal unit, and we were survived because the tribal unit was necessary after the Holocaust that happened to us in Northern Africa, and we were dispersed. And this tribal unit, this group, which maintained itself and made the great migrations, allowed us to survive. And we did survive, and we did come out of the tribal unit to create the great nations of Ghana, and Mali, and Songhai, the great nations of Zimbabwe and all that. But tribalism persisted in Africa. And it was the way that the European and Arab was able to get in to set tribe against tribe. And to enter into those competitions for chieftainship and to favor one clan or against another clan, So these are some of the factors that we have to question as to why we did that. Now the effects of the Holocaust in the Arab world, well, here, I don't like this name thing, I talk about that. With psychological slavery, it's still with us today. We have the Jesus complex, and now we have the Muhammad complex. I'm looking at some names here. Ibrahim, Abdullah, Jorge, Alejandro, Charles, Robert, Henri, Jean-Francois, Django, Agostino, Annette, Maria, Halima. None of those names is African. They're all alien, Arab or European. But we love those names. Claudette, Maria. Don't sound sweet. It sounds so sweet. Or does it sound sweet? Well, you like to call your daughter Makeda instead of Maria? Or Nzinga instead of Annette? You got to think about it. Now, one thing that we know psychologically, I know you're getting a little restless now, but I ain't finished with you yet. I'm going to get you here and put this into your head so you come out of here with something in that you never heard before. The African tradition and value system. The African tradition and value system. That's one of the things we have lost because of enslavement and this great diaspora. These high moral standards have been debased in many areas of the diaspora, and even the mother of Africa, by association with Aryans and Arabs, two races which are notoriously prone to homosexuality and lesbianism. Oh, you didn't know I was coming with that? I'm never going to let you go without that. The practice of lesbianism derives its name from the Greek Mediterranean island of Lesbos. The subtle, steady infusion of homosexual values and ideals from the surrounding alien culture into African communities of diaspora is a menace that must be recognized, attacked, and eradicated. No, the rape and spoliation of African womanhood by the white man, Arab and European, during the periods of our enslavement, have created a wide assortment of color and phenotype in the diaspora. Now, you know, I like to talk about the Caribbean, you know, because we come over here and we say we're such bad dudes and everything is all right down below there, but it ain't all right at all. Because if it's so all right, why is it that we don't have power throughout the Caribbean? Why can't we invite our African brothers and sisters to come down and enjoy the Caribbean with us? Why do our posters tell us about white people coming down to enjoy the sands and beaches? And we got 35 million beautiful black people up here who should be down there with us, taking over every square inch of the place, right? Right. Ain't happening though. Look at the things that we have. We worried about color. And look at this classification. There's a famous Jamaican classification. You have passing for white, high brown, low brown, teasing brown, plain black, and pot black. Ooh. But that's nothing compared to the divisions that you had in Haiti. Boy, they had so many different ones. They divided down to an ethnological unit of 1/64th part of Aryan blood. That means they had 64 different classifications. Man, we were crazy. Now, I mean, now all you don't laugh now, you know. I remember a little old friend of mine now, he made a movie called School Days. You forget that? You got some problems like that right over here. They ain't gone away yet. You got some people that think that they're qualified for leadership just because of the color of their skin and something else, right here in America. So we all got some bad faults. That's why we're not ruling the world now. No, we got to get rid of all those faults, clean up our minds. I'll leave some of this for when I finish this book I'm writing. Now, the last thing I got to talk about before I close is reparations. And I want to make it clear. Reparations have got to be by the Europeans, of course. White Americans, Germans, Frenchmen, Englishmen, Spaniards, Portuguese, all of them. And the Jews. And the Arabs. Saddam Hussein. Hafiz Assad. Hosni Mubarak. All of those dudes have to pay reparations because they enslaved us for 1,300 years. That's a long time to be under the whip to the Arab. Now, what are the reasons for reparations? We demand reparations for the following reasons. One, the murder, mutilation, and torture of our ancestors and kinsmen during our enslavement. Two, the wages which were not paid to our ancestors and kinsmen during the periods of chattel slavery. The pain, suffering, and mental cruelty to which our ancestors and kinsmen were subjected. The possessions and property which were lost to us when we were forcibly removed from our homeland of Africa. The loss of our freedom during slavery. That's 5 reasons for reparations, and I'm certain we could find more. Now, in 1989, when I first wrote this little paper, which I've been quoting so liberally from, I did a calculation on the reparations that were owed to the Africans of the Caribbean. Now, it was easier to do because I had a baseline to work from. What I used was the amount of money that was given to the white planters of the Caribbean in 1834 to compensate them for the slaves. And that was 30 million British pounds, which was 120 million US dollars. And how did I start my calculation? I said, well, there were 16 generations of slaves up to the time of 1834. And I worked that out roughly. So this is a general technique for working out. And I'm saying, therefore, that if I have 120 million for the worth of this generation, and there were 16 generations of slaves during slavery, then when you work that figure out, you have $1,920,000,000. Now, because we are modern Africans and we know that interest is always involved in calculations, we calculate at the very conservative rate of interest of 5%. And we apply the well-known compound interest formula. You can't see it from here because I hold it up. A is equal to P into bracket 1 plus R over 100 to the power T, where A is the amount, P is the principal or initial amount, R is the rate, and T is the time. Now when you apply that formula for the period, you get your P is the 1,920,000,000, your R is 5%, and your time was from 1834 to 1989. It's 155 years. Now when you work out that amount, you come to this awesome figure. Let me just count the amount of zeros, and then you have 9 zeros, and in front of that you have 3,694,900. I don't know how to describe that. Okay, let me give it to you. It's 3.695 to the power countries of the Caribbean. I mean, I talk again of Jamaica because I'm very familiar with there, but of every dollar that is raised in taxation in Jamaica, more than 50 cents of that dollar goes to service the external debt owed to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The latest figures that I had for Africa show that the total debt of the 30-something countries in sub-Saharan Africa is in excess, and this figure was from about 1986, was in excess of $310 billion. It's much greater now. So you see that the load that we are carrying can be relieved by reparations. Now people talk about the passage of time. I don't agree. The passage of time cannot affect the validity of our claims for reparations. No statute of limitations can run against monumental and massive genocide. The records of the Holy Bible are a direct guide for us at this time. From the book of Numbers, chapter 14, verse 18, the Lord is long-suffering of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. We have to away with us the third and fourth generation of our enslavers, since the institution of slavery was ended in the period 1834 to 1900. Bill Clinton and Al Gore, listen to our cry for reparations. In conclusion, I say, no race of people can disregard their history. They do so at their very peril. But the African, above all others, has a special lesson to learn from the history of our enslavement and degradation. We must say more than any other people, never again, never, never, never again. God and history will judge the Arab white man of the East and the man of the West. But it is for us, the Africans of the diaspora, to prefer the bill of indictment. Brothers and sisters, I thank you, and I hope that the little words I've given you today make a lot of sense to you and will make you ponder for some time to come.
Yes, sir.
Take a rest and we have lots of questions.
I need a rest.
Sisters and brothers, before you move, before you do anything, I know Sister Juanita will harm me, and Sister Imani would harm me if I don't.
But if you want to get a book, the brother from New York sells this, the brother from New Jersey hasn't had it. He's the only brother I know that sells this here one by Garvey Jr. Yeah. Excellent book. It's the best book that I find that basically breaks down a lot of detail easy that you can understand. The other one is 2,000 Seasons. I can't say the name too good, Brother Mooney knows her, which is an excellent book that deals with the Arabs and what they did to us. And the third book, what the brother sells here, is the invasion of Egypt, the last 30-year domination of Roman domination. Now this here book is when you really want to talk to, what's the young brother that spoke here a couple weeks, Brother Trush? When you really want to get into the exact names of people that he was naming. This is a scholarly work book. This isn't what's called easy book, but if you get into this here book, believe me, You be able to talk to anybody, wherever they are, about any subject when it deals with these here Muslim brothers, and like you said, the Arabs, anyway. The Arab invasion of Egypt, the last 30-year domination of the Romans. That's a scholarly word. I mean, you hit so many points that basically, it's like you were saying, our people I found a lot of times, I go to a lot of lectures, and one thing I found out right down here, and I went to one last week somewhere else right around not too far from East Orange, and the brother who was giving it, he said one thing at the end. He said that he wished that we wouldn't talk about the religions and this and that, and that basically we can keep it on par and don't talk negative about the religions. But at the same time, we'll talk negative about the African brothers walking around the street. And then the mess that we in, like the brother say here, we got to put everything on the table and reanalyze it and be willing to talk about everything. And this is one of the few places you can go where we talk about everything and everybody, including ourselves, and how we're going to get out this mess that we got ourselves in. And I think we should give ourselves an applause being able to do that. Because there's some of us here that go to the slave theater. They don't even have question and answer period no more because they started so late and end so late. But this is a place where if you don't agree with this brother, you can get it on with him right here. And
anytime.
You know, I just like to thank him for coming because I believe our people put too much faith before the facts. And once we deal with the facts, everything will change, including faith. Thank you so much.
You're my brother.
I enjoyed the lecture very much. And I wanted to ask you, what are the governments in northern Africa of Libya, Algeria, Egypt, Mauritania, Tunisia, Morocco, Arabia, what are they doing to stop the African slave trade, and what has the OAU been doing?
I don't think, I am not aware of anything that the OAU is doing as a body to stop this slave trading. The reason why is that they are afraid to confront this issue because it's such a sensitive issue between Muslims and Christians. Oh yes, my sister, but our African brothers and sisters are not ready to face this issue of the Arab and the African. This has been something that's been going along for a long time. I mean, the very fact that you had an official end of slavery in Mauritania on July 1980 tells you that something awful wrong was going on for a very long time. 1980 is just the other day. That's less than 13 years ago. It ain't ancient history. And it's still going on, sister, as you say, because our people will not face this for religious and other reasons. If the fact is that it's done by a Muslim and I'm a Muslim, then I'm not going to call it. Now, I don't like to bring this up. Maybe I shouldn't, but it was personal. I remember when my daughter died in Brookdale Hospital in Brooklyn in 1974, I took up the matter with several prominent people, Christian and Muslim, in New York, and nothing came out of this issue. My daughter was turned out of the hospital by a Muslim, Cyrus Ahmadi. Now, when I first approached the Muslims, they said they would be going to defend the son of the Prophet's daughter, Mr. Garvey's granddaughter. But by the time they realized I was a Muslim, I never heard any more word from my Muslim brothers of the mosque. And the Negro politicians of Brooklyn, they didn't touch it because some of them were on the board of Brookdale Hospital. So don't wonder why these facts are not taken up. If people are getting money or by have their religious leanings why they don't touch this thing, then that will continue. Because some of us expediency above conscience and honesty. And this is a matter of conscience. You see, look at what is happening in the Sudan right now. Millions of our people are being destroyed in the Sudan. This war has been going on for over 20 years. The Dinka people of the Sudan are being destroyed. The Noors, all the people of the Sudan. These are African people. These are the Nubians. And it's the Arabs of the north of the Sudan, of the Sudan and of Egypt who are doing this. And they are being aided and abetted by weapons that they are acquiring from their Arab associates, Gaddafi and all of those fellows. So don't ask why they wouldn't interfere in slavery. They're killing our people. Gaddafi has been interfering in Chad and Niger and other areas. He's pushing south. And that's why I've tried to show the people in South Africa that if you have the Arabs pushing from the north coming down south, and the white man pouring into the south, you're asking for destruction of the race. The first thing we have to do is clean up the pus and cancer in the south and get them all out. Yeah, but we don't want to fight on two fronts, sister. Nobody wins a war where you fight on two fronts and first deal with the devil in the south, then we come and we march north, then we go into the holy city of Jerusalem and bring the Arab over and spank his behind right in front of the Wailing Gate.
Amen.
Ah!
Before you do anything further, we will bring a brother from the Sudan here early next month.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
Prepare. I'll send you the information. Brother from the Sudan, because originally we were doing two programs, your program and his program back to back. But because we were getting Zach Kondo at the time, we slipped in Zach Kondo. Okay? So there will be a brother from the Sudan coming here next month.
And that point, I think we reached a stage now where we should be giving direct assistance to our brothers in the Sudan.
Yes, sir.
It is a very serious situation there. There is no reason why so many of us Africans outside should not be involved in this great struggle that's going on. Because this is the ultimate struggle of Northern Africa. I mean, what is occurring in the Sudan? It is the descendants of Kemet who are there in the Sudan who are being murdered by the Arabs.
I just want to say that I enjoyed your speech. It was very enlightening. And I just want to make a statement as to something one of the brothers said a few minutes ago about we should do business with each other. Now, I live in Newark. And about last month, when they were building the mosque in South Orange Avenue near Burgerfield, talking about the Muslims now. And I passed by there every day. They had a bunch of looking like Arabs or white people or Chinese and somebody build their mosque. You saw what this? I have never seen anything so disgraceful in my life. I'm not teaching hatred, but the people who enslaved us, killed black men when they got old, they couldn't do no more work in the Middle East, and the Muslims supposed to, we love black people, we want to help black people. But you passed by their mosque last month, sir, in this city, they had a bunch of white looking people doing their work. They couldn't find one black man to do the work after the black people built this whole country on slave labor. I want to say one more thing. And these people are sick people. Then they come and tell you to buy their paper, but they don't contribute to black people. And they call themselves Asiatic black men, like you say. I'm an African black man. I don't care what nobody say. Don't come to my face like no Asiatic black man. Not that I hate other people. I'm an African black man. And also, the Muslim women from that mosque. If you looked at the paper a couple of months ago, they was demonstrating Muslim black people in America. This is about black Negroes. They was demonstrating, talking about what the Russians are doing to the Bosnian women over there in Russia. What they're trying to say, they don't understand that's the ancestors coming up, rebellion now, that's our payback. And you would never go to that mosque and get, and that whole mosque on South Orange Avenue, I can see it because I'm not afraid to see it. You could get 10 women or 10 men out of that mosque to demonstrate if something was happening to a natural black person that didn't go to that mosque. You could get 10 out of that mosque. Now, and also, anytime somebody has sold their birthright and say that their religion or their destiny or their pyramids in Mecca, you got to be crazy. How can somebody say, my home base is Mecca? My home base is Africa. I think that these people should be held accountable for saying such craziness. Because how can my home be Mecca? I mean, I'm not trying to hate the Arab, but I mean, I don't have a love for it at the same time. But what I'm trying to say, they go hugging the Arab and kissing the Arab, and the Arab be frying up at these schools. They don't want to be part of it. How do you expect that your slave master, or anybody that ever enslaved you, going to turn around in 1993 and love you? They are completely insane, and they're going crazy. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, my brother.
Wait a minute. Can anybody in here, you know, as well as I know, that the nation of Somalia is 99% almost 100% Muslim, right?
That's right. They
ain't Arabs, they Africans. Right? All these Africans that be going to that mosque down mosque number 25,
That's right.
they ain't opened their mouth yet about what's going on in Somalia. We will not even mention the mosque down there on Branford Place, all right, which is controlled by the Arab.
That's right.
All right, totally controlled by the Arab. I've seen these brothers suck up to the Arabs. Anytime an Arab said, wa alaikum salam, salam alaikum, whatever, with the kufi and when they be hooked up and all like that, it's over.
That's right.
That is God.
That's right.
All right, we got the Jesus freaks, and like the brother was saying, we got the Mohammed freaks. Now we get ready to get a little bit of Elijah freaks too now. But name one brother or one group in the Muslim, African American Muslim community that have spoken up about the violence that's being done to our brothers and sisters in Somalia, and they're Muslims just like them.
That's right. Don't forget black freedom fighters.
I'm sorry.
I would have to say the Nation of Islam has spoken up under Minister Farrakhan in support of the people of Somalia. I have a videotape home right now where he had a group of Somalians at the mosque recently, both male and female who was there. And he spoke up very strongly in their behalf about what was happening there. I'm talking about the Nation of Islam, not the people on South Zone. We don't allow white people, anybody else in their temples. Or the group just down here on Rapid Place. The Nation of Islam, takes a very close pro-black stand. Now, these Sunni Muslims is something different.
I thank you for clarity. But still in all, with Louis Farrakhan, come on.
Brother, they have not done anything to my knowledge to claim their own heritage as African.
This is exactly what I was saying. Today is something different. I was saying that the Nation of Islam, under Minister Farrakhan, has taken a strong stand in support of the people of Somalia, or just about everybody else black, regardless of what y'all might think then. But what I'm saying is that the Sunni Muslim community, to our knowledge, has been exactly like you have said. They have not spoken up at all in support of the people of Somalia. They really like this to the Arabs. I agree with you on that, but the Muslim community does not take a universal stand on this issue. There are Muslim groups who are very nationalistic, who take a very pan-Africanist approach, and there are those in the Sunni Muslim community, some other ones who are basically pro-Arab. Whatever the Arabs say is correct. So you have to make a distinction between the two. As a matter of fact, the Nation of Islam is having its first International Saviors Day in Ghana in 1994, where Farrakhan has taken over maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people.
My brother, I just have a quick question. As an organizer, I know you had to deal with that institution, that is the church. Then how do you approach, a situation like that, whereby people are sectarian in their thinking and the like? Because at the same time, we need them in the liberation movement to fight, for their, self-determination. What then is the realistic approach? Because there is that antagonism. But we need to go beyond it.
Well, we follow the teachings of Marcus Garvey. He's very clear on this. He says, let no religious scruples divide us. So in the UNI and ACL, we have no formal religious affiliation. Now, I know you will say that we had the African Orthodox Church, but the reason for the African Orthodox Church was that we need to have the emphasis on the black God. You see, if you have a black God, then you have a black Allah, and you have a black Jehovah. These problems don't arise. You see, the first thing is for you to accept that your God is black like you. The white man can have a white God, the yellow man can have a yellow God. The brown man has brown God, but we as Africans must have one God, the God of Africa, who made us in his own image and likeness. And that is the problem, that's the way we have to approach it. We should not attack religions, and we in the UNIA do not attack religions. But we point out the error and falsity of overzealous religious thought, which makes a man into less than a man, because he's guided as the same way as a donkey or a horse is guided by someone who has an intellect and is using reasoning to put him along a path without even flogging his behind. And that is what religion is doing. It is putting you along a path without even applying force to you. You are submitting. And therefore we say, you cannot submit. You must think logically and say, is my God colorless? And if God is colorless, then how can he be a God for you? I mean, if you accept that God made you in his own image and likeness, and I don't know anybody who says no to that, then what is your image and likeness? Your God, if you're black, then your God has got to be black. And once you accept the blackness of God, you see, this is the eighth and final concept of Garvey's. Marcus Garvey laid down 8 building blocks for us, and I'll just give you them again. African identity, African pride, African self-reliance, African economic power, African unity in the national international sense, a great central nation in Africa. Apply science and technology to the work of African nation building and African racial reconstruction. And the final and 8th concept is, our God is black, we must have an African image of the Godhead. And that's it. Follow those 8 principles, you don't have any problem organizing or thinking. But you have to state them clearly to the people, and the people will understand. And if you look at religion now, you'll see that black liberation theology is taking hold all over the place. That's why all these people are on the defensive. And that's why so much Arab money is being spent in America to convert the 35 million potentially very strong nation of America towards the Muslim way of life.
First of all, I'd just like to say good evening to you. It was a pleasure hearing you speak. My name is Corey Giles, and I just, we touched on a lot of interesting subjects this evening, as far as religion and the history of the African, but my question would be to you is how do we how do we take this and then put it into our everyday life as far as the children, that's in urban areas now, where I live, in the projects and in the cities and in the ghettos. How do we generate this energy, these positive, philosophies and these positive, elements of knowledge to these kids who basically, are not religious, and basically just, living to survive every day, and I'm kind of confused, I don't want to be a preacher and stand in the corner because they won't listen to me, you know what I'm saying? So my question to you would be, how would I generate this positive vibe that I feel in this knowledge and try to get it to my younger sisters and brothers, you know what I'm saying, and try to get them maybe to understand and try to respect themselves as the forefathers of civilization, and understand that they have the power and the knowledge, to rise above the situation that they're living in. That would be my question.
Now let me answer you. The only way you can do that is through a organization. That is, if you do not take part in organization, then you yourself are a part of the problem which we are trying to solve. See? Now, first of all, the kind of action that you are saying is taking place not only in the United States of America, but in Canada and in the United Kingdom and in the Caribbean and also in Africa, in different places, where our children are being taken at an early age and taken out of the traditional system and being taught in shoelays and schools, some of which are actually part of the public school system. I was recently in Detroit, and where they have a Marcus Garvey Academy in the public school system. They also have a Malcolm X Academy and a Martin Luther King Academy. Now these are what are called independent and empowered schools within this. And those schools, the principles of the people's name are being taught in the schools, and African nationalism is being taught in the schools to these children at an early age. You go in there and you see children able to recite the what you call it there, Brother Karenga's things, the Nguzu Saba, and explain it at an early age. They are taught the principles of Marcus Garvey, what Malcolm X said, and this is applied with science and technology, so that they are well ahead of an advance. Now, they are in a controlled environment, so it is for us to establish controlled environments. Now, I gave you an indication of a very unusual situation, but there are many private schools in the cities where I've been, where they have Garvey divisions. I have noticed private schools. For instance, there's a very famous one in Los Angeles, Dr. Anion Palmer. And there you have children at the age of 12 or 13 doing very advanced mathematical work. And they are very consciously aware. You go in there and see those children painting, and they are painting Marcus Garvey, they are painting Malcolm X, and they are reciting poetry. I went to Canada, to Toronto, and was taken to a special school like this on a Saturday morning. And there the children were. And it was amazing to see, to me, a little African-Canadian child get up and write and read his poem about my father, and about what my father stood for and what African nationhood means. That little child was only 10 years old. So you know it's happening out there. But we don't have enough of it. Now I say get into organizations. Get into organizations like this. Get into the UNINACL. And let us establish these schools. We have these plans. Take care of the control, the teaching of our own children. The Jews do it. The Chinese do it. The Jews will go to school, a public school, right through the week, but he goes to a shule all that time in the evening on Saturdays at the shule. And he's getting training in Jewish education. And what makes him a very special person, different from the rest of the community. You see, if we know that we're special people, then we ain't going to take no gun and kill each other. If we know that we're a special temple created by God, then when you look at another special temple like yourself, you ain't going to hurt it. You're going to look out there at the beast and you're going to deal with him, just like what Sister Soldier said.
Okay, my question that I have for you is this. I guess I should be ashamed really to say that I just recently found out about your father from a friend of mine who was
Africans are intelligent people. Nobody has to force us to accept something. I think we can analyze, but the point here is that you had not confused Islam with Arabs. Every religion has been misused by unscrupulous people. So was Marxism, for that matter.
I just want to know, was Christianity or did we just accept it?
Oh,
Hold on. This is an open forum, so sometimes we're going to be stepping on some people's psychological barriers